Good morning, everyone. Giza is much more than the pyramids. It's actually a huge Old Kingdom cemetery. Today I'm going to show you the lesser-known face of the Giza necropolis.
You will see places rarely visited, almost never filmed. Hidden corners of probably the most famous ancient site in the world. Giza. Its private necropolises house hundreds of mastabas, tombs of the Egyptian elite, from over 4,500 years ago, still standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramids. As always, I'll show you rare footage and tell you more about the history of these sites, which today are often overlooked by tourists. Let's go! The enormous private necropolis of Giza consisted of hundreds of mastabas of officials, mostly from the Fourth Dynasty. It's huge, although tourists concentrated on the pyramids, sphinx and temples seem to ignore it. In fact, it's not one but several necropolises that didn't arise spontaneously around the Great Pyramid, but were part of Khufu's grand plan. He wanted to recreate his royal court in the afterlife. It was for this purpose that he founded these cities of the dead for his court and family, with mastabas arranged in parallel rows and narrow alleys that we can stroll through to this day. These were the so-called cities of the living Ka. The oldest necropolis is the so-called West Cemetery. It was probably built right after the construction of the Great Pyramid began. Unfortunately, you can't enter its premises. Filming is of course prohibited, but I'll try to show it to you another time. We're now in the so-called Eastern Cemetery. It includes mastabas east of the Khufu satellite pyramids. This is the later and most prestigious cemetery reserved for the royal family and the highest officials, who were then most often members of the pharaohs' family. Unfortunately, of the hundreds of mastabas, only a few are open to visitors, including the mastaba of Queen Meresankh III, the granddaughter of the great Khufu and the wife of his son, Khafre. We are in the main chamber, measuring 7 by 3 meters. Intense colors and reliefs in good condition are rare in Giza, which was, unlike for example Saqqara, very intensively explored and exploited for millennia. This colorful inscription states, "The king's daughter, of his body, the king's wife." It also contains texts referring to Meresankh as a worshipper of Horus, Set and Anubis, who at that time still played the role of the main god of the dead. The new religion of Osiris rapidly grew in popularity only at the end of the Old Kingdom. Behind the pillars with images of the queen, there is the north chamber, containing images of 10 standing figures of women, unidentified representatives of the royal family. They wear rather short wigs and long, tight dresses, the typical appearance of noble women of the Old Kingdom. The most peculiar image of the queen is on the western wall. The unusual yellow painted wig is controversial. According to the famous American archaeologist George Reisner, who discovered the tomb in 1927, this color means that the queen was simply blonde. Behind Meresankh we see her son, Nebem-Akhet. The white sash on his torso symbolizes his status as chief lector priest, and he also served, like other Khafre's sons before him, as a vizier of Egypt. We're in the small western offering chamber with false doors decorated with 2 statue niches. Here we read, "An offering which the king gives, and Anubis, lord of the sacred land, foremost of the divine booth, that she may be buried well in the western necropolis. May she proceed in peace to the cemetery as a possessor of reverence before the great God, lord of the burial. May offerings be presented to her of bread, beer, and cakes in this her tomb and in Busiris and in Abydos and in every place." Here the reliefs show motifs typical of later mastabas, such as processions bringing gifts of bread and poultry to the queen, musicians and dancers. In the main chamber the colors have been remarkably preserved. Before us, Prince Kawab, father of the queen and eldest son of Khufu, his vizier and successor. Unfortunately, he died while Khufu was still alive, so the next pharaoh was his brother Djedefre, who left Giza and built his pyramid in Abu Rawash, today called the Unfinished or Ruined Pyramid. Only the next king, another of Khufu's sons, Khafre, would return to Giza to build his gigantic tomb complex. And again, processions with offerings, scenes of hunting birds, boats. All these scenes, typical of mastabas, are significantly inferior to the artistry of craftsmen from the 5th and 6th dynasties, whose sophisticated works we can admire today in Saqqara. However, it's one of the first mastabas decorated in this way. It seems that only when the pharaohs abandoned their ambitious, lavish projects, such as the Great Pyramids, did decorative art flourish. In the offering chamber we find the 5-meter deep shaft leading to the burial chamber. The chamber is empty, as if unfinished, 5.5 by 3 meters in size. Traces of tools and salt shining in the light of the flashlight are the only decorations on its walls. There was once a granite sarcophagus here, now in the Cairo Museum. It originally belonged to Meresankh III's mother, Hataperes II. The inscription on the sarcophagus reads, "I have given it to the king's daughter and wife, Meresankh." Interestingly, the woman's skull found in the sarcophagus was unnaturally elongated, similarly to that of Akhenaten's daughters who lived over 1,000 years later. Mastaba Meresankh III was named G7530. Its discoverer, Reisner, introduced a system of marking the tombs of the Giza necropolis with the letter G, similarly to the earlier abbreviations KV for the tombs of the Valley of the Kings or TT for private Theban tombs. Additionally, Giza tombs have a 4-digit tomb number. Those from the eastern necropolis start with 7. G1 is reserved for the Great Pyramid, while the satellite pyramids of Queens G1A, G1B and G1C belonged to Khufu's mother, wife and daughter, respectively. As you can see, the pyramids are still closed to visitors. Khufu had his two necropolises, eastern and western, but there are more of them in Giza. Near the southern wall of the Great Pyramid is the G1S cemetery, also called the G1 South cemetery. It wasn't created during the times of Khufu, but probably during the times of Menkaure. However, Giza isn't only the Fourth Dynasty. Above G1S stands out the well-preserved monumental facade of a tomb from the Sixth Dynasty. The once rich mastaba belonged to Seshemnefer IV, the head of the royal harem, which means that he managed the part of the palace intended for women and children from the royal family. Seshemnefer titled himself Director of the Two Thrones in the Mansion of Life, Secretary of all secret commands of the king, Chief of Bat. While the kings of the Sixth Dynasty were building their tombs at Saqqara, some of their courtiers preferred to rest in the shadow of the Great Pyramids in Giza. There's even a sarcophagus in its original place. The mastaba was discovered in the 1840s by the Prussian archaeologist Karl Lepsius, who took the reliefs from its interior to Germany, leaving only those badly preserved or incomplete ones. Seshemnefer IV built his mastaba in a prestigious place, very close to the Great Pyramid, more than 200 years after the death of Khufu. However, this isn't the latest tomb of the southern cemetery. There are rock-cut Said tombs from the 26th dynasty, carved not 200 but 2000 years after Khufu's death. While in the Eastern Cemetery I often saw lost tourists in the so-called Central Field, I didn't see them at all. The Central Field contains countless mastabas, tombs carved into the rock in the area of Khafre's vast quarry, from which the pharaoh obtained material to build his pyramid. The cemetery lies on the southern side of Khafre's causeway, leading to the Sphinx. There are mainly tombs from the 4th and 5th dynasties. The cemetery is marked as G8000. The necropolis begins east of the Khafre funerary temple and ends at the Sphinx and the Valley Temple of Menkaure. So it's a large area that was thoroughly explored only in the 1930s by the Egyptian archaeologist Selim Hassan, who did a wonderful job, described almost every shaft of the necropolis, and even discovered several undisturbed tombs. Wherever we stand, we are surrounded by shafts. These are sometimes the only remnants of mastabas that no longer exist. Several or even a dozen or so meters deep, at some point, shafts turn into horizontal corridors leading to the burial chamber. In the case of these most modest tombs, the chambers are only slightly larger than the sarcophagi inside them. Here in Giza, almost only the bones of mastabas owners were found. Mummification methods in the Old Kingdom were still imperfect, and it was reserved almost exclusively for members of the royal family. Mastabas appear in the 31st century BC as royal tombs of the Fourth Dynasty, according to some researchers under Mesopotamian influence, and were built until the beginning of the New Kingdom, that is until the 16th century BC, when they were replaced by above-ground chapels built over underground tunnels and chambers, and by simple shafts without any superstructure. In Giza, both traditional mud brick and stone-built mastabas were erected, but what's characteristic of the central field are half-stone, half-rock-cut tombs, often carved out of natural rock and only covered with a stone casing. The lack of interest among tourists in this place has its own special charm. There aren't even many guards here, and the cemetery is inhabited by stray dogs. But be careful, not all of them are so cute. My favorite feature of mastabas, of course the rich ones, of which there are many in the Giza necropolis, is that they have a serdab, that is a small chamber isolated from other rooms, housing a statue of the deceased, the habitat of one of the components of his soul, Ka. It was a non-material but exact copy of a living person, existing even before his birth. Each human Ka, along with its individual characteristics, was created by a god who, in the form of the ram-headed Khnum, the divine potter, was molding an image of the Ka from clay on a potter's wheel, before placing it in the mother's womb. Thanks to Ka, the deceased regained vitality and received food in the afterlife. Therefore, the statues in serdabs had to be safe and perfectly preserved. Mourners and relatives of the deceased could only view them through small holes in the wall behind which it was located. They also made regular offerings to statues using the cult chapels inside mastabas. When mummification was still imperfect and rare, the soul had to recognize the deceased in the statue, hence the extremely realistic sculptures characterized the Old Kingdom. It's truly surprising that none of Khufu's images have survived well enough to determine what he actually looked like. As we know, in the Old Kingdom, particularly realistic stone or wooden sculptures were created, often life-size. Unlike those from, for example, the New Kingdom, they weren't stylized or idealized. Thanks to sculptures found in Memphite mastabas, we know what Khufu's brothers, Ankhaf and Rahotep, looked like. These statues of Rahotep and his wife, Princess Nofret, are particularly impressive. Looking like living, perfectly preserved, painted limestone statues are famous for their glass-inlaid eyes, the reflection of which in torchlight was supposed to scare away the workers who first looked at them during the excavation of the Rahotep mastaba in Meidum in 1871. Perhaps a similar realistic statue of Khufu is still waiting somewhere here to be discovered. After all, it was here in Giza that the famous stone sculptures of his successors, Khafre and Menkaure, were found. It's in the central field that we find the oldest rock-cut tombs in Egypt. As we know, from the Middle Kingdom to late antiquity, it was the most popular type of burial in all of Egypt. The number of tombs carved in the rock, which were so to speak a technical novelty in the times of the Old Kingdom, is surprising. They all appear unfinished, which is actually a typical feature of Egyptian tombs in general, regardless of the period. It doesn't matter whether we are thinking about the pyramids and mastabas of the Old Kingdom or the tombs of the New Kingdom and late period, the death of the owner usually meant the suspension of work in the tomb. Giza isn't only the cemetery of the ancient Egyptian elite. The cemetery of the pyramid builders of the Fourth and Fifth Dynasties working in the necropolis is located a little further south, behind the so-called Wall of the Crow. The cemetery was discovered by Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass in 1990. Excavations conducted by the American archaeologist Mark Lenner from 1988 to 2002 on the southern side of the Wall of the Crow revealed the remains of a large settlement from the 3rd millennium BC, adjacent to the wall. A characteristic find are long galleries, interpreted as workers' barracks, used for sleeping. The complex could accommodate at the same time up to 2,000 men resting after working on the pyramids. The long, roofed rooms were divided by a colonnade, on both sides of which workers could lie next to each other quite comfortably. Each side was wide enough for a person to stretch out. It's possible that each barrack was assigned to one gang. At the back of such a gallery, there was a more comfortable quarter for the gang supervisor. Thanks to hieroglyphic records, we know some of the gang's names. There were, for example, Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure. The lodgings were temporary. The barracks fell into ruin already in Menkaure's times. The settlement consisted of administrative buildings, bakeries, warehouses, a port. The Nile reached here during floods, and in the very center of the settlement there was the residence of the chief overseer. A similar workers' town was found east of the Khafre pyramid. We don't know how many such settlements existed at Giza, but there were certainly several of them. It's believed that approximately 20,000 workers took part in the construction of the Great Pyramid, and the Greek historian from the 5th century BC, Herodotus, claims that there were as many as 100,000 of them. The mysterious Wall of the Crow, Hayt el-Ghurab, gateway to the Pyramid Zone. We see its eastern remnant. Originally it was huge, 10 meters high, 10 meters wide at its base and 200 meters long. Its function isn't entirely clear today. Some researchers suggest that it was intended to protect the necropolis against Wadi floodwaters. Filming the wall wasn't easy. It's forbidden even to approach the wall because it's separated from the ancient necropolis by a Muslim cemetery, which tourists are simply not allowed to enter, and the area around the cemetery is today used as a stop for horse and camel riders. So today we didn't admire the monumental architecture or spectacular works of art, but I hope you learned more about the somewhat forgotten cemeteries of Giza. Of course, I only showed you tiny fragments of the Giza necropolis. If you're interested in this topic and would like to see more, please let me know in the comments and I'll definitely come back here. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy our historic journeys and want to help me continue this, please join my Patreon community, link below in the description. Please like, comment and share my video with your friends. Special thanks to all supporters of my channel, both patrons, thank you, and those sending super thanks. Thanks to you, I can create new content. If you're new here, I recommend you to watch my videos from Egypt, Malta, Turkey, Greece and Italy, as well as my podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel to be up to date with new episodes. And see you on another ancient site.